afternoon as we commemorate the centenary of the sinking of Lusitania. And I have just thanked Con Hayes for his invitation and all of you for that work. It's always a pleasure to visit Cobh and to meet so many people who worked so hard on preparing for this event. Cobh, Kinsale and Cork are the three places most closely associated with this seismic and historic tragedy which claimed almost 1,200 lives, including those of at least 90 Irish men and women. And as you've heard, it is important to note, I think, and emphasize that all three towns, Cobh, Kinsale and Cork, displayed in response a heroism that was extraordinary and which will live forever in the memory of the communities who come after those who went out with such great heroism and concern, and who will be remembered rightly by all of their people. I speak of the lifeboats and the local fishermen who took part in a vast range of rescue operations, and of course brought to shore those who had survived, and more poignantly, cared for the remains of those who were drowned on that fateful day in May 1915. Resting on the seabed in Lusitania is, I think, above everything else, a marine grave. It is for that reason, among others, and with related issues of due respect that were due to that fact, as well as its importance to Irish history and to its wider international significance, that led to my taking decision 20 years ago as Minister for Agriculture and the Gaeltacht to place an underwater heritage order on the wreck of the Lusitania. The sinking of the Lusitania is a critical chapter in the history of the First World War. The fact that 128 American citizens lost their lives is often cited as the catalyst for America entering the war in 1917. While this may not be simply so of quite the entire picture, it undoubtedly had a significant impact on American public opinion with regard to the war, and on the resolve of President Woodrow Wilson, who had intended to leave the United States too. America eventually abandoned its neutrality and entered the war on the side of the Allies in April 1917, a decision which had the effect of hastening the end of the war, thus sparing many lives that might otherwise have been lost on the Western Front and elsewhere on the battlefields of Europe. The sinking of the Lusitania is a story, of course, that has gripped the imagination of the world over the intervening decades, and filled the pages of many books and articles in the years that separate us from that tragic day in May 1915. Some of these writings celebrate the significance of the Lusitania as a technical marvel of the age, the hubris of the age, reminding us of its place in the history of shipbuilding and as holder of the blue ribbon for the fastest Atlantic crossing. Other authors, of course, have speculated as to its cargo and as to whether it was carrying armaments, and if that might have contributed to the second explosion that made better the rapidity of its sinking. These are, however, stories for another day. Beyond the historical significance of this event, we all come here today to remember the human tragedy of the 1,200 who died in the cold water of the Celtic Sea on a beautiful summer day in 1915. We remember the lives cut short and the futures and the possibilities that deliberately Corra or law, denied by the tragedy visited on unsuspecting voyagers who thought they were within safe reach of their destination when the Lusitania was torpedoed by a German U-boat in May 1915. I think in particular of those who were returning to Cork and had seen the shore. From the accounts of the survivors, we have some sense of the almost unthinkable horror that they faced. A shortage of lifeboats, the injuries suffered with the initial hit and explosion, the desperation as passengers and crew tried to save loved ones, the terrible choices and anxieties that had to be endured, including the pathetic account of parents trying in vain to save their children, the treacherous loss of Manchester, and the violence of the rapidly sinking ship, and the dreadful wait for help in an ice-cold sea surrounded by the bodies of the dead, the morrow. We come here then today to think of those men, women and children and what they endured. And we think in particular of the rapidity and generosity of those communities who rose in response to the living, the survivor and the dead. And I know that joining us here this afternoon are over 100 descendants of those who lost their lives at the Lusitania near the coast of Ireland 100 years ago. I say to you that you represent the many families ruptured by that catastrophic event, and you remind us of the myriad human stories contained within the tragedy that is the sinking of the Lusitania. But we come here to mark, as I said, the courage and compassion of the people of Cobh, Kinsale and Cork-McSherry, and all who undertook the rescue operation and managed to save the lives of the 700, and who also then recovered, as I have said, and cared for the remains of the dead, a very important central part of Irish heritage. We remember the vessels that came to the aid of the victims, and especially to the lifeboats who rowed out 12 miles to the site of the wreck in open sea, and some on several occasions. We can only, of course, imagine the trauma which this tragedy brought to the town of Cobh, a town which, of course, knows well the perils of the sea and the relationships of its people to the sea, but which must still have been overwhelmed with the horror of a scale that was scarcely conceivable in terms of death. And there are so many stories of the heroism and the selflessness in the course of the rescue operation. And so it is appropriate that the people of Cork would honour and be proud of how their ancestors responded to this terrible disaster, and in their response laid an important marker for generosity of community. All wars have their forgotten or unsung victims, and those whose deaths do not bring forth posthumous medals or tributes. However, as we engage in a period of commemoration of World War I, it is important that we not only focus on those who lost their lives on the battlefield and in the trenches, but recall the millions of civilians whose lives were also cut short during that catastrophic period of world history. Some, like the casualties of the Lusitania, were the victims of deliberate acts of war. Others died through malnutrition, famine, and related disease. In whatever way they lost their lives, they were victims of a destructive and indeed bewildering world war, and their tragic deaths should not be used of collateral damage, but must be honoured and remembered with the respect that is due to all life. Today we are also reminded that World War I was a war with a global reach, one that affected all areas of the European continent and so many areas beyond. Among the list of passengers and crew who perished that day are listed individuals and families from Canada, Britain, Russia, Norway, Persia and Belgium, reminding us that the wreck of the Lusitania is part of a global shared tragedy and heritage. And as we recall today then the individual stories of the passengers on this ship, we remember that during a 4-year period, an estimated 17 million lives were lost to a war that was the product of political and diplomatic failure, and a war that failed to prevent further conflicts in Europe and other parts of the world, including the Second World War, which followed just a short few years later. The importance of recalling the horror of war is that it should press us all to cherish and mature peace, to nurture peace, to defend the role of diplomacy, and seek to have it extended and reformulated as necessary to achieve peaceful resolution of conflict. In recent weeks I participated in the commemoration ceremony at Gallipoli, another dreadful episode of that First World War, where Irishmen, including many from Cork, became the victims of a cruel and murderous war. Immediately after visiting Gallipoli, it was fitting that I had the opportunity to visit our troops today, who are working in South Lebanon to support peace in that troubled land. And at a time when the world is once again facing conflict and dispute in so many regions, the urgency of the work of making and maintaining peace between nations and people once again takes on a great importance. Ireland is a country that has known the horror and pain of war throughout our history, but it is surely one of our most significant achievements that since our independence we have sought as a nation to work towards peace, with peacekeeping lodged at the centre of our foreign policy. Agus me the Queen of Erin Lusitania Marshall, agus ar is siúd a full boss o Costa Cair Corky, Cair Leonardo. Is a magui ganyeti trainee at Siacon, agus cohish get a Cobh, either got nor she. As I have said in that spirit, as we remember today the Lusitanians in Centenary, and those who perished off the Cork coast a century ago, let us all redouble our efforts for peace and understanding between nations. And may I finish by thanking then all those involved in the ongoing commemorations here in Cobh, where the Heritage Centre has a permanent exhibition dedicated to the memory of RMS Lusitania, and also to those in Kinsale and Cobh for their hard work and initiative in keeping this important story alive for future generations for their reflection. And may I wish the new Lusitania Museum project in the signal tower of the old head of Kinsale every success. I will be meeting with representatives of that project shortly at Lusitania, and I hope to visit when the museum is up and running. Then there is the magnificent bronze sculpture here in Cobh by Jerome O'Connor to the victims of the Lusitania, and this is a lasting and fitting monument to those who died when the ship went down. As long as it lasts, together with the wreck on the seabed and the simple headstones in the old church cemetery and elsewhere, the memory of that day will not be forgotten. For those who died 100 years ago today, so close to our shore, might we finally say of them all, Erieste Gorevamana, Gorevilama.